Most recently, request for the payroll has been asked for on 2 occasions via email, and no answer. So as it stands right now, we've gone a month and a half. The last payroll that I've seen was September 1st, and we want to make sure we have this information.
Hello again, everyone. In this video, we'll discuss what the board did when Tiffany's administration failed to provide the necessary payroll information. Let's hear from board member Jason House, who will explain why they had to take action and implement this order to address the lack of payroll data.
Action regarding ordinance number 21 amending ordinance 1-6-4 powers and duties. Trustee House.
Thank you very much. This ordinance was put up here authorizing the finance department or department heads to have conversations or to speak with the board members regarding issues or questions that they may have. I will say I put this up here specifically because there are a couple of times that I made phone calls in to department heads when they were instructed that the administration or mayor or administration would not allow for that. So I'm asking that we move this forward so that way the department heads have the access to make sure that they are.
Got it. Jason explains that they want to enforce a rule because Tiffany's staff isn't providing the necessary information. Now, let's hear Tiffany's response to these accusations and what she has to say.
I hate to hear that because I never instructed anybody not to give you any payroll reports. Why would I do that? So
Tiffany says Chris is responsible for the money, so she'll have him explain what's happening. Of course, she should already know, but she'll likely claim ignorance. Let's listen to what Chris has to say about the situation.
Here, Chris. So we're going to get it cleared up right now. And this is what I state to you guys all the time. If y'all have an issue or something's not being done, or maybe you got just dropped at the wayside.
Haha, you're right. Tiffany always has an adder spin, doesn't she? It's like a reflex for her at this point, turning the conversation into a whole performance. She spent so much time defending herself, shifting blame to the board for not reaching out enough. But it seems like she intentionally steered away from Chris. She was supposed to let him explain things, but by the time she was done, the focus had shifted. Classic move, distract, deflect, and then let the heat die down. You can almost feel the smoke and mirrors working overtime to cover her tracks.
Got the information, so why would I not give it to you guys now? So that's the direction. Any other questions or concerns?
I thought Chris was going to elaborate on that because I want to make sure that I'm completely understanding because I'm here, which is also why I prefer the email so that way there is documented communication. I'm not here to lie on anybody else, on the mayor, Chris, anybody. There's a couple of times that I had these concerns. I spoke about them privately, but I mean, trying to email us was documented, and I would love for Chris to kind of tell me, am I crazy when we spoke or what?
So this told you that I said you could have it? Is that what you're stating now? Or what are you saying? I didn't get the question.
Yes.
Okay.
Tiffany Henyard's handling of the growing payroll controversy reveals an unsettling pattern of contradictions and evasions, and her latest responses are no exception. In this situation, Henyard is confronted with a clear conflict regarding the approval of payroll reports, and her defense of herself leaves more questions than answers. When board member Jason House brought up the issue of payroll reports, it was clear that the board had been waiting on certain critical documents from the mayor's office. These reports were supposed to include a breakdown of payroll differences and any changes, such as new hires or salary adjustments. This transparency is important for oversight and accountability. However, Henyard's response to House's concern was troubling. She claimed that it wasn't necessary for Chris, the person in charge of payroll, to run the reports by her for approval because she had access to all the same information that was being provided to the board. She further asserted that anyone in need of this information should just call her directly to avoid confusion. Yet, Chris's version of events sharply contradicts Henyard's narrative. He stated that Henyard had specifically asked him to run the payroll reports by her for approval. This directly contradicts her claim that she didn't need the reports in the first place. Henyard, however, quickly dismissed Chris's statement, accusing him of lying and inventing a false narrative. This type of response, blaming others when faced with contradiction, seems to be a recurring pattern for Henyard. Whenever there's a discrepancy or someone challenges her, she immediately dismisses their version as lies or misunderstandings, reinforcing her belief that she is always right. But why would Henyard go to such lengths to deny something so simple as a payroll report approval? There could be several reasons for this. One possible explanation is that Henyard may have wanted to withhold certain payroll details from the board. It's possible that there were questionable or unauthorized changes in salaries, new hires, or raises that might raise suspicion or be seen as inappropriate by the board. By controlling the narrative and downplaying her involvement, Henyard avoids scrutiny and keeps certain details under wraps in her defense. Henyard continued to insist that she had always told her staff to provide whatever documents the board requested, including payroll reports. She stated that if Jason House or anyone else on the board asked for a report, she had instructed Chris to provide it. So, according to Henyard, there's no need to complicate the situation. Just call her if there's any confusion, and she'll handle it. She further emphasized that she was setting the record straight in front of the board to avoid any misunderstandings about what was said or requested. However, this statement still raises more questions and answers. If Henyard truly wanted to make sure everything was clear, why did she take such a defensive stance and accuse Chris of lying when he tried to clarify what happened? Her response seemed more like an attempt to protect her own image and control the flow of information, rather than a genuine effort to resolve the situation. In fact, Henyard's tendency to claim that she is always right and that anyone who disagrees with her is either misinformed or intentionally misleading only serves to erode trust within her administration and the broader community. The situation gets even more complicated when we consider the reaction of Trustee Cab Beller. Beller appeared to support Henyard's stance, reinforcing her claims and expressing some sympathy for her. He essentially agreed with her that Chris's version of events might have been inaccurate, suggesting that Chris wasn't defending himself and therefore might have been lying. Beller's statement raised suspicions about whether he was genuinely trying to help resolve the issue, or if he was simply aligning himself with Henyard for political convenience on the surface. Beller's comments could be seen as an attempt to offer support to Henyard and calm the situation. But his remarks also seemed to imply that he was siding with the mayor in a way that might have been more about maintaining political favor than addressing the underlying issues. Was he genuinely trying to help the board move forward, or was this a calculated move to avoid antagonizing Henyard and risking her wrath? What's clear, though, is that Henyard's response to the situation fits into a larger pattern of behavior that we've seen throughout her administration. She frequently portrays herself as the sole authority on any matter, and anyone who disagrees with her is either lying or misrepresenting the facts. This type of behavior is a classic tactic for leaders who are trying to maintain control, especially in the face of growing dissent. In this case, Henyard's focus on defending her actions and framing herself as a victim by insisting that anyone who questions her is misinformed suggests that she's more concerned with her own political survival than with solving the real issues facing Dalton. The mayor's defensive and evasive approach to this payroll issue could have serious consequences for her ability to lead moving forward. If she continues to avoid taking responsibility and dismisses legitimate concerns, it's likely that her credibility will continue to diminish. The board, despite some support from Trustee Beller, is increasingly frustrated with her behavior, and the public is watching closely to see how this plays out. Henyard's refusal to accept responsibility is not just undermining her authority. It's also contributing to a larger crisis within the administration. This crisis is not limited to payroll issues. It extends to the broader financial mismanagement and dysfunction that has plagued Henyard's tenure. If Henyard continues to avoid accountability and deflect blame, the situation will only get worse. As more details about her questionable behavior emerge, including her lavish spending and possible misuse of government funds, the calls for her resignation will only grow louder. The question now is whether Henyard can maintain control and avoid the consequences of her actions, or whether the mounting pressure from the board and the public will eventually force her to step down. Her response to Chris's statement about payroll approval is just one small piece of a much larger puzzle, but it highlights the troubling patterns of manipulation and deflection that define her time in office. If the situation continues to escalate, it's likely that more individuals will come forward with their own account of Henyard's behavior, exposing the full extent of her leadership style and the dysfunction within her administration. For now, the question remains, how long can Henyard continue to deflect criticism and avoid accountability before the pressure becomes too much for her to handle? The tension surrounding Henyard's leadership is palpable, and it's clear that the stakes are incredibly high. As the mayor continues to deny her involvement in key decisions and accuse others of lying, it's becoming increasingly difficult to trust her version of events. The more Henyard tries to control the narrative, the more obvious it becomes that her leadership is unraveling. Whether she can salvage her position, or whether the growing discontent from the board and the residents will force her to face the consequences of her actions, remains to be seen. One thing is certain: the scrutiny on Henyard will only intensify as this situation continues to unfold. How she handles this crisis, along with the mounting public outrage and political pressure, will determine the future of her political career and the fate of Dalton's local government. Every decision she makes now is being watched, and each misstep could be the one that finally forces her to confront the reality of her leadership. The coming weeks are critical, and the community is demanding accountability. Will Henyard be able to hold on to power, or will the scandal be the tipping point that brings her administration to an end? The answers to these questions are still up in the air, but one thing is certain. The situation in Dalton is far from over, and the pressure on Henyard is only going to increase.
Anybody come in and ask for certain items, y'all know my phone number, call me and let me know. That's what I've told anybody that works here for me. So what I'm saying to you with payroll report, why would I need you to give me the payroll report for the staff? Why would I need that? I don't need that. I got the same information that you're giving to the board. Why would I have to give you the okay to say, give them the payroll report or give them...
Tiffany Henyard's approach to board meetings is quickly becoming a subject of growing concern. What might initially appear as a simple defense of herself is increasingly being seen as an evasive tactic, leaving the impression that she may not even be fully engaged in the discussions taking place. A key moment that highlights this behavior occurred when Trustee Cab Beller explained the reasoning behind his Freedom of Information Act FOIA request. As an elected official and a resident, Beller explained that he felt the need to access certain public records to make informed decisions. He clarified that his decision to file the FOIA request wasn't an attempt to complicate things, but was a last resort. He simply couldn't get the information he needed using the usual channels, however. Henyard's response to Beller's legitimate request seemed dismissive and inattentive. Instead of addressing the genuine concerns raised by Beller, she brushed off his reasoning and failed to acknowledge the very real issue he was trying to highlight, that the information was not being provided through regular means. This moment encapsulated Henyard's consistent tendency to defend herself at all costs, even when it comes at the expense of addressing the real issues at hand. Rather than engaging in a meaningful dialogue, Henyard appears more concerned with managing her image and maintaining control of a narrative, especially when her actions or decisions are being questioned throughout the meeting. This defensive posture became painfully evident. Henyard's primary focus seemed to be on presenting herself in the best possible light, often deflecting the conversation toward her own leadership and accomplishments, regardless of concerns raised by others. This approach reached new heights when she made bold claims about her leadership, positioning herself as a guiding force for Dalton. At one point, Henyard compared herself to a lighthouse, a metaphor that she believes reflects her role as a beacon of hope for the town. However, this analogy felt increasingly disconnected from reality. In the face of ongoing financial struggles, leadership controversies, and increasing dissatisfaction from residents, comparing herself to a lighthouse seemed like an attempt to construct a narrative of heroism that simply didn't align with the circumstances facing the town. This tendency to elevate herself through metaphors took an even stranger turn when Henyard compared herself to Jesus. The remark, which undoubtedly raised eyebrows among those in attendance, appeared to be yet another attempt to position herself as a savior of Dalton, despite the mounting evidence to the contrary. The comparison, which some may have found tone-deaf or even troubling, reflected Henyard's pattern of elevating her own status and attempting to frame herself as an almost messianic figure. Someone who is above reproach and above the fray of this behavior raises important questions about Henyard's self-perception and the motivations behind her actions. Does she genuinely believe the narrative she's constructing, or is she merely playing a strategic game to preserve her political power? The constant need to present herself in an idealized, saintly light has made her appear increasingly disconnected from the reality of Dalton's struggles. It's as if Henyard is so consumed with her self-image that she's lost sight of the very real issues the town is facing, from financial mismanagement to strained relationships with the board and an ever-growing public dissatisfaction with her leadership. As the board meeting continues, it becomes increasingly clear that Henyard is more concerned with defending herself than with addressing the very issues that are at the heart of the town's difficulties. Her refusal to engage meaningfully with the concerns of the board, her lack of attention to the public's needs, and her inability to own up to problems at hand all point to a fundamental issue with her leadership style. Whether it's avoiding discussions about the town's finances or ignoring the frustrations of the board members, Henyard consistently deflects responsibility and refuses to engage in productive dialogue. Some might argue that Henyard's defensive behavior is simply an attempt to assert her authority. However, the more one watches these meetings, the more it becomes apparent that Henyard is not genuinely invested in governing Dalton. Her actions suggest that her true priority lies in maintaining her image and holding on to power, rather than addressing the actual problems facing the community. It's hard not to wonder whether, in Henyard's mind, any criticism is viewed not as a valid concern, but as a personal attack, something to be deflected and dismissed rather than engaged with in good faith. What's particularly concerning is that Henyard's tendency to present herself as a misunderstood hero, despite her actions suggesting otherwise, only further erodes her credibility. The more she tries to cast herself as the savior of Dalton, the more she becomes alienated from the very people she is supposed to serve. Her insistence on presenting herself as the ultimate authority, one whose word is beyond question, makes it harder for residents and board members to trust her. The more she frames her actions as justified, regardless of the reality around her, the more her credibility weakens. Instead of engaging with concerns in a constructive way, she turns every conversation into a defense of her own actions, pushing the conversation away from the actual issues that need attention in her speeches. Henyard often repeats the importance of truth and transparency. She claims to value openness and honesty in leadership, yet her actions consistently contradict these principles. Time and again, she deflects responsibility, dismisses legitimate questions, and focuses more on defending herself than addressing the serious issues at hand. It's as though Henyard is trapped in a cycle of self-justification, constantly deflecting blame and avoiding meaningful engagement with the issues. This dynamic only deepens the mistrust that residents have in her leadership, as they see her more as someone who is concerned with her own image than with the well-being of the community. The most troubling aspect of Henyard's leadership style is how self-centered it has become. Rather than stepping up to address the challenges facing Dalton, she appears far more focused on protecting her own political position. Whether through bold metaphors about being a lighthouse or comparing herself to Jesus, Henyard's primary concern seems to be how she's perceived, rather than the real, tangible issues affecting the town. This disconnect from the needs of the community, combined with her refusal to engage in meaningful dialogue, raises serious questions about her suitability as a leader as the situation continues to unfold. It's becoming increasingly clear that Henyard's leadership style is defined by defensiveness, self-preservation, and a lack of accountability. The more she distances herself from the real issues at hand, the more she alienates herself from the very people she is supposed to serve. Her tendency to dismiss concerns, deflect blame, and present herself as a heroic figure in the face of growing public dissatisfaction only serves to undermine the trust of the board, the residents, and the wider community. Ultimately, Henyard's leadership is on a precarious path. As she continues to prioritize her image and deflect responsibility, the cracks in her administration are becoming harder to ignore. The more she tries to maintain control of the narrative, the more the true nature of her leadership becomes clear, one that is self-absorbed, disconnected from reality, and resistant to accountability. Whether she can recognize the damage she's doing to her own reputation and make the necessary changes to address the issues facing Dalton remains to be seen. But for now, Henyard's approach to governance continues to leave residents and board members wondering if she is truly fit to lead the community into the future.
So all the lies need to stop. That's why I keep saying to the board of trustees, call my phone. That's why I say that all the time. Because people will lie, people will say anything to save themselves. So just call me. That's it. We can clear it up. So now it is clear. Clerk Key, can you please call the roll? Yeah, go ahead. And just so y'all.
Tiffany Henyard's leadership continues to face intense scrutiny, with her actions repeatedly placing her at the center of controversy and conflict. Despite her public claims of transparency and cooperation, her behavior in meetings speaks volumes, revealing a consistent pattern of poor communication, mismanagement, and a struggle for control. During a recent board meeting, Trustee Chris, acknowledging Henyard's statements, highlighted a recurring issue. The trustees had not been receiving essential payroll information. Henyard had previously told the board that she would need to approve the release of certain documents, but Chris clarified that moving forward, there would be no additional barriers. This moment, although a small win for the trustees, underscores a larger issue. Henyard's ongoing interference and attempt to dictate how information is shared. Trustee Brittany Norwood expanded on this issue, revealing that she had emailed Henyard multiple times about the payroll concerns but received no response. As a result, the trustees were left in the dark for months, unable to access critical payroll details. Henyard downplayed the delay, calling it a matter of just a few weeks, but her repeated use of the phrase "for the record" did little convince anyone of her transparency. The trustees' struggle with basic communication highlights the disconnect between Henyard's claims of openness and the reality of her administration's dysfunction. To address this breakdown, Norwood and her colleagues had to create an ordinance enforcing responsible spending and ensuring better communication between the administration and the trustees. The need for such a measure, directly stemming from Henyard's refusal to provide information in a timely and transparent manner, speaks volumes about her leadership style. It's telling that the trustees had to take this action simply to function effectively, a sign of Henyard's failure to lead in a collaborative and transparent manner even after the ordinance was created and passed. Henyard's actions continue to reflect a pattern of deflection, avoidance, and mismanagement. Trustees felt the weight of her inability or unwillingness to collaborate. This behavior was again on display at another board meeting in Thornton Township, where Henyard serves as supervisor. The similarities between her actions in Dalton and Thornton were striking. Once again, Henyard found herself placing blame on everyone but herself. In a bizarre exchange, she complained that her minutes were not being added to the agenda for approval, questioning why the board couldn't include her items. This is especially ironic given that Henyard has consistently ignored the trustees' requests and added her own items to the agenda in both Dalton and Thornton. Her lack of respect for the board authority, combined with her continued attempts to control the flow of information and decision-making processes, mirrors the same behavior she displayed in Dalton, where she repeatedly undermined the board in favor of her own interest. Attention in both meetings is palpable as Henyard persists in the belief that she is the one in charge and that her decision should take precedence over everyone else's input. Her refusal to acknowledge the board's role or collaborate with them only further erodes any trust that might remain in her leadership. It's becoming increasingly clear that Henyard is more focused on maintaining control than on governing effectively. This dynamic, with growing discontent among trustees and residents alike, reflects her leadership's fundamental flaws. The way she manipulates the agenda and disregards the board's authority has turned what should be meaningful discussions into chaotic exchanges driven by self-preservation rather than addressing the needs of the community, as the trustees in both Dalton and Thornton begin to recognize the same troubling patterns. Their frustrations are starting to sound increasingly alike. Despite their efforts to hold Henyard accountable, she continues to deflect responsibility and places blame on anyone who dares to challenge her. The situation has reached a tipping point where even those who have supported her are beginning to question her motivations and leadership. One trustee, speaking candidly about the dysfunction, called out Henyard for perpetuating chaos within the township, suggesting that her actions are causing more harm than good despite the mounting pressure. Henyard remains resolute in her belief that she is justified in her actions and that the chaos is simply a reflection of a larger conspiracy against her. Her refusal to accept responsibility, combined with her lack of meaningful engagement in the challenges facing the community, fuels the perception that she is increasingly out of touch with the needs of the people she is supposed to serve. This pattern of deflection, self-preservation, and refusal to collaborate is only deepening the divide between Henyard and the very residents and trustees she is meant to lead. The more she tries to control the narrative, the more her credibility erodes, and the more isolated she becomes from those around her. As this situation continues to unfold, it's clear that Henyard's leadership style is causing increasing damage to both the trust in her administration and the functioning of the community.